Hi, folks. Dr. Mike here again. This is chapter 19. We're almost at the end. And I want to talk to you today about violence and war as an ethical consideration. We live in just almost a constant state of war somewhere in the world. There's, I think, 250 some wars going on right now in the world of one kind or another. I've had a lot of experience in various areas like that. I taught in a refugee camp in Rwanda from the Hutu and the Tutsi uh, uh, crime of trying to kill genocide, of trying to wipe each other out, and dealt with your young people in learning. And I've also met some others that have come from those kind of areas. I've known people from the Holocaust, the Germans on the Jewish people, and even today when we're involved in the war in Israel, we're seeing a lot of issues in our society and people taking sides one side or the other. I've been privileged to travel all over the world. I have been 11 times in the Middle East. I have been in Gaza. I have been in the West Bank. I've been in Israel multiple times, and I have known the people there. I know I've been in Lebanon. I've been in Jordan, in Syria, and these people are. The bottom line is that they're all human beings. They're all people that put on their clothes just like we do in the morning and go out wanting to have a normal day, raise their children. The problem is that we tend to take sides and we tend to brand people one side or the other. When you see a Muslim lady with her hijab, her headpiece on, you immediately think of terrorist. That is not true. The 1/3 of the world's population is Muslim, but not nearly 1/3 of the world would be terrorists, those that go out to cause all the bedlam and the chaos that goes on. Well, in Gaza, Gaza is a good example when we look at those people in Gaza are Palestinian Arabs. They are being used by Hamas, who's the terrorist organization, as a human shield to keep Israel from just going in and wiping them out. And this breakout into Israel, into the countryside, in the kibbutz area where they killed and slaughtered over 1,200 people. And then they pull back and hold these people hostage. And it's really a terrible situation. And then we see the news that the Israelis have killed over 13,000 Palestinians. Those were not Hamas people. Those were Palestinian Arabs that lived in Gaza trying to have a normal life. The geopolitics of that situation is quite old. It goes back to the 1940s when Israel was declared a nation, and we just carved out land for them and stuck them on it and pushed the Palestinians that lived there into these borderlands, and they've become one big refugee camp now for over 75 years. So there's points to be made on both sides, and so we should not actually take a side until we know all the ramifications that go on with that. But this is where wars come from. Sadly, in our history, most wars have come about because of religion. Almost every war has some kind of religious component to it, or an economic component. Those two things make up probably 100% of wars. And so we need to realize that there's more to it than just, somebody hating somebody else. There could be all kinds of things that are going on. And so as we look at our text about violence and war, there are different levels that we can have as an ethical viewpoint, that we can go from one extreme to being against all wars to, having no ethic at all. And so I think I want to show you some things that we need to think about in making our ethical stance in some of these things. In the real world, violence is a tool, of course. The people who believe in consequentialism focus on results, less on morality of a means to achieve them. You go in and take a country. Saddam Hussein tried to take Kuwait in the 90s, and we had to force him out of there. Connected to militarism, military power is tremendously useful. You see all these countries in Africa constantly overthrowing their government, and the military take over in a junta and rule, and that is just one form of rule. We used to have a lot of that in South America. That's the way Cuba was under Fidel Castro, was a military junta that ruled. Sometimes these people have absolutely no moral or intrinsic moral limits to warfare, and moral ideas just don't apply to warfare where they're concerned. But but we do need to be strategic when we use these things and have a purpose. There is one aspect of warfare that we think about. Pacifism is where all war is wrong. There are groups of people in the world that don't believe there's ever a time you take up weapons. The Amish would be a group like that. The Mennonites, which are in many of your areas around Cleveland, they would be pretty strongly pacifist in that they believe all war is wrong, and they believe that all killing is immoral, and that there are nonviolent alternatives that we could approach that would be helpful, and sitting down talking and negotiating would be helpful. And they usually will ground their teachings in the same things that Gandhi did or that Martin Luther King Jr. did. There are a lot of non-religious arguments that are involved. It doesn't have to be religious, as the Amish are, but the critics sometimes argue that killing is sometimes necessary to defend life. Many of these people would not even defend their own life. The other theory is called the just war theory, and it's limited use of force. It's called just ad bellum, or just because. There is a legitimate authority, a legitimate government, and as a last resort, they have the right to intervene. That would be the case, I think, in Kuwait, where George Bush Sr., the president, put together a coalition of democratic nations when Saddam Hussein overran the oil fields of Kuwait and threatened to take over the country. They put together a coalition. They went in. It had a very limited mandate into what it would do. They got Saddam Hussein out of the country, and they stopped, and they came home. They did not pursue taking him out, which did happen later, but it didn't happen at the time. And of course, Bush Sr. got criticized for that, for not taking Saddam Hussein out, and people felt he lost prestige. But there, you go back to the agreement that was made between him and those who went with him. They fulfilled their agreement and then left. Now, George Bush Jr., his son, probably felt differently about that when he went in and took Iraq and took out Saddam Hussein, had him killed. That was probably not a good thing, but it was more about getting your father's good name back than it was making that big of a difference. We face a lot of issues today in this area. One is terrorism, of course, the violent act of causing widespread terror, just like the Hamas did with the Israeli settlers in attacking on all fronts. It's often grounded in realism, which is the third thing we'll talk about, and that is the intentional warfare is intentional. It has a purpose. It brings us to the place they want to be, and this is considered a war crime. Terrorism is, and so targeted killings and drones are something that's a reality today. That's made this whole issue very, very unsettling. Is because we can actually pinpoint and take out a particular person. Maybe he's head of Hamas, maybe he's head of a terrorist organization, and you can pick him out. I've actually seen it where they would target the guy who's riding in the middle, in the back seat, in the middle spot. Two guys on each side. The drone kills him and leaves the other two without being killed. That is, in many ways considered to be unethical, in kind of targeted killing. So we have weapons of mass destruction today, which was a big deal with Saddam Hussein, in that we thought that he had weapons of mass destruction, either biological or chemical or nuclear. He had used them against the Kurds in northern Iraq. And so this was a different level of danger. You have war crimes, and you have universal human rights boards that try to bring these people to justice, and it gets to be huge. Torture is another one. Waterboarding, enhanced interrogation methods, pacifism versus realism, no war versus anything goes. I think probably one of America's darkest moments was when George Bush Jr. allowed the setup of Gitmo on the island of Cuba, and we took our foreign prisoners there so that we could torture them or waterboard them, which is something Americans had never done. And that has been closed down now, I think, for everybody, but that was not our finest moment. That is not how Americans have behaved in the past, and and how they would want to be remembered in the future. You're going to read in this chapter several different thoughts on this, philosophers' thoughts on war and violence. I think you'll find that interesting, and the TED Talk as well. Remember that the TED Talks, as we end up, may not be a one-for-one comparison. But it's always about issues that we've talked about in the class. So don't actually look for each one to have one matching to what you're talking about. I look forward to you finishing up your writing on this subject today and reading, and then we'll see you tomorrow for our last lecture. Thank you.